Social media is spectacular. Facebook tears down barriers and connects us with the rest of the world. YouTube has created a whole new career path and is the biggest learning platform in the world, as well as one of the biggest entertainment platforms. And then there's Twitter. Unfortunately, all of these awesome perks come with issues of their own, from privacy concerns to cyberbullying. In this video, I'll be discussing social media addiction, my experience with it, and how we can combat it. Whether or not you want to call it an addiction or not doesn't really matter. It might not fit the definition of addiction or seem that serious, but the crux of the issue is, if you're watching this video, you probably spend too much time on social media and it's negatively affecting your life. Social media addiction is a tricky thing because it isn't inherently negative. It doesn't make you high or drunk, and it doesn't directly impact your productivity or your health. And yet, at the same time, it does, because it takes a lot of time out of your life. I mean, shit, according to YouTube, I spent 10 hours watching videos on the 25th. And this is time that could be spent cleaning or exercising or doing your job. And because we don't do these things, it does end up affecting our health or our productivity or just our overall quality of life. Yet, we can't just remove social media from our lives because, as I mentioned earlier, social media is fucking amazing. And it's getting more and more ingrained into modern society. So what then? We're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Well, the obvious answer is to learn to control our social media use. And while that is the topic of this video, it's a lot easier said than done. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that you probably aren't addicted to social media. Because unlike other addictive activities, social media doesn't come with a care package of addictive chemicals. The closest thing we get is dopamine that our brain produces, but we get dopamine from a lot of things, like exercising, so that doesn't explain why social media is our go-to option. The bad news is that you probably have a pretty serious problem somewhere else. Because while social media isn't addictive, it is a great tool for escapism. So if you're spending a lot of time trying to escape, it's probably a pretty serious problem you're trying to escape from. On the positive, according to this theory, if we just deal with the underlying problem, our addiction should just fade away. But what we're trying to escape from isn't always obvious. I mean, we're actively trying to ignore it. So how do we figure out what the root problem is? Well, we observe ourselves. Honestly, I could make an entire separate video on the topic of observing yourself, so I won't cover everything in this video, but the main things are: if we want to improve ourselves, we'll need to know where to start. And the only way to do that is to pay attention to our behavior. If we start to notice when and where we're the most productive, as well as what distracts us the most, we can start to use that information to improve our days. Figuring out what the root problem is the same thing. If we start to notice when and where we look at social media, we can start to figure out why we look at social media. But without a doubt, the most important thing about observing ourselves and making these theories is that we're completely honest with ourselves. And that's a lot harder than it might seem. Because if we lie to ourselves and draw false conclusions, then we can avoid dealing with the real problem. So, observe yourself carefully and be completely honest with yourself. If you can do those two things, you can figure out why you're addicted. We want to reach the point where we use social media enough to reap the benefits, but not too much as to waste our time. Right now, we use social media way too much. So there are two things we can do to reach that Goldilocks zone. We can reduce our social media use gradually, deal with the root cause over time, so taking it slow and steady, so as to not overburden ourselves. Or we can do a complete reset, a cold turkey, where we face the main problem head on and deal with it immediately, and then reintroduce social media gradually. For either of these methods to work, they need a solid plan behind them. If you want to do it gradually, then first of all, you'll need a deadline. A planned point where you'll be down to minimal use of social media. I think a month is a fair amount of time to get it under control. You'll also want a way to track your use so that you know you're going in the right direction, but more importantly, you should add milestones throughout the month that you're aiming for, like reducing your use by half after 2 weeks. Lastly, you should add time to evaluate your progress, see if you're on schedule, and if you're actually dealing with the root problem. Because if you don't fix the main problem, then reducing your social media use won't work in the long term. To go cold turkey, you again need some kind of timeline, and once again, 1 month seems pretty good. Then you need alternative activities you can do instead of social media, but more importantly, you need to set time aside to deal with the main problem. The cool thing about going cold turkey is that it stops you from escaping and thus forces you to recognize the problem. And once you know what the problem is, you can deal with it. I've mentioned it in passing, but I'm addicted to YouTube, or well, I use it for escapism. I've been observing myself for a very long time now, so I have a pretty good idea of what my root problem is. I'm in a very uncertain and pretty scary part of my life right now, and I'm trying not to think about it. And recently I've been very uncomfortable in silence because silence promotes thought and my mind instantly jumps to thinking about and trying to fix my life as it is right now. So I fill the silence with YouTube videos. I also procrastinate instead of doing things that would solve my situation because if I take action against my problems, that means I'm acknowledging that there are problems. So my plan is this. Cold turkey from YouTube until the end of February, starting now. By the way, it's much more important to start now than to wait for the end of the month or the end of the week. You should do something while you're motivated to do it. Because I won't be watching YouTube videos for 10 hours every day, I'll need something else to do. So, I'll be keeping a list of entertainment options as well as a list of productive to-dos that I can do if I'm in the mood. But keep in mind that the point of this exercise isn't to replace social media with productive activities. We just want to reduce social media use first and then reintroduce productive activities later. One problem with going cold turkey is that you might be relying on social media for certain things. So you might want to keep a list of exceptions. In my case, I'm allowing myself to use YouTube for music and when I watch YouTube with other people. That way I can remain social with YouTube and chill with my girlfriend without feeling bad. And neither of these activities tend to trigger my addiction, so I should be good. I also use YouTube for learning, like productivity videos or just learning about my hobbies. But these kinds of videos tend to trigger my addictions, so I can't add them as an exception. Instead, I'll have to rely on written content throughout February. It's important that you think these kinds of things through beforehand, because if you don't, you'll end up making a quick decision in the moment because it's more convenient, and then you'll trigger your addiction. The last thing I'll do to tackle my root problem is to schedule in 1 hour every couple of days just to think about my situation, and get peace of mind with everything. It's something I've done before, and I know it helps. I just stopped for some reason. To round everything off, figure out what your root problem is, and then make a plan to deal with it. And if you don't know what it is, then start by reducing your social media use and then noticing your behavior. And this should clue you in on what your root problem is. Then make a plan to ramp down or reset your social media use. Think your plan through so you're prepared for the next month. Write down any necessary exceptions that won't interfere with your progress. And make it easy for yourself to not use social media. Last but definitely not least, start now. There's no time like the present, and there's no telling if your motivation will be gone tomorrow. This is the first video of a 3-part series. The second part is going to release in the first week of March, and in it I'll be talking about my cold turkey and how we can keep our social media use under control for the long term. The third part is going to be further down the line, and I'll be summarizing everything I've learned during this process. If you're interested in seeing the next 2 parts of this series, you should hit the subscribe button so you're notified whenever they get uploaded. Other than that, I upload every Thursday. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, and if you didn't, hit the dislike, and I look forward to seeing you next time.